I request everyone to please be seated as we are going to start with our workshop on scientific writing. And for that, I would like to request our first speaker, Dr. 𝐒𝐭𝐞𝐿 Tullius, to please join us on the dais.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your very kind invitation to be here in this wonderful city, in this wonderful venue, to talk to you about considerations when writing a grant proposal. That is indeed a challenging approach, a challenging aspect to write a grant, to look in the way that we can identify the best topic that we have, the best address and the best funding resource, and put together an exciting project that then has an opportunity to be funded. When I give this talk, I want to be sure that you understand that I'm giving this from my own perspective, the perspective as a clinician scientist. I'm a surgeon, I do clinical work, and I feel that that is an advantage. It is an advantage for me that I have the opportunity to identify topics that I consider of relevance, bring them back to my research laboratory, try to ask questions that are clinically relevant, develop strategies, develop ideas, concepts that I can then bring back to the clinic for the benefit of our patients. But that approach may not be the approach for everyone. It doesn't need to be the approach for everyone. And it also comes with disadvantages, which is that one is very much involved in the clinical work, and it is at times hard to find a sufficient amount of time to do the research. Starting out talking to you about grant applications, I want to guide you to a few aspects of concerns and an assessment on how young individuals in the United States feel about doing research. This is a publication that came out approximately 12 years, and what it shows you is in black here the time that young transplant surgeons wish they would be spending, intended to spend, and actually spent. And you see overall that clinician surgeons in the United States would want to spend more time on research, and that there is an aspect, and that can be multifactorial, that is holding them back, either the clinical involvement or the preparation of doing the research, or, and that is very relevant in the United States at least, research long-term can only be done if there is funding for this research. And again here, the aspect that analyzing what surgeons, clinician surgeons, young surgeons in the United States would want to do, most of them would want to do more research, and to do more research, it is important to apply with grants and to get funding. And what do those individuals in the United States perceive as barriers that they cannot move forward with their research? And I'm showing you here what I consider the most important ones. There is the dilemma, and I started out with that, by being clinically a busy physician, surgeon, not finding enough time. The clinical demands are in the way. Mentorship, I think, is a critical portion. If we want to do research right, there needs to be a senior member who takes the junior individual under her or his wings and supports them for the research, goes with them through the design of the research application, and then funding. We talked about that funding is a critical issue. The lack of startup research funding is experienced as a barrier, and the failure to obtain grants. So getting grants, a critical portion in doing research successfully and long term. Now, obviously, there is a critical portion on the way to get funding is how much do governments, individual governments spend for funding. And I'm listing you here several countries and their expenditure on research and development. And you see there is quite a variance of research being spent, and therefore it is important also to advocate, to make sure and to approach those who are in charge to create funding, to put more funding into research. And the Nature Index, which is an index that provides an aspect of the overall research output that is done by nations, shows this here as well, with quite a variety of research output seen throughout different countries, different geographic areas. And you see here that funding, the support of research, immediately goes along with the output of meaningful research as well. Now there is, and you may know this better than I do, quite an initiative in this country to support research. There's the National Research Foundation that has been initiated not too long ago with a very strong goal to put support into medical and scientific research. And we talk about an amount of 6 billion over 5 years that the Indian government is planning to reserve for funding. And an interesting aspect in this way that this research foundation is constructed, that there is an input, that there is a combinatorial effect and support both by government and by the industry to boost investment into research. So it is worthwhile and it's very timely to consider research in this country, to focus on research, and therefore to think about how one can best design and write a grant to get support through this research. Taking advantage of the disadvantage, that's the role that we have in our coming out as clinicians. We take an advantage from the disadvantage of being absorbed clinically, but we have an opportunity to define exceptional and relevant questions. We have an exceptional insight, motivation, and aspiration that is the result of the deep interaction that we have with our clinical work. We need to have time that is dedicated to our research, and it is important to think about research as a long-term investment. It will pay out long-term, and it will provide a benefit not only for the interest of the work that we are doing, but also for our patients. And in setting all of this up, it is important to initiate and to construct a relevant and a robust mentoring structure that will allow the support of those who are up and who have an interest in applying for research grant. And with that in mind, transplantation, as much as it is a team sport clinically, it is also a team sport if we want to do successful research. So starting out thinking about writing grants, it is important to align our goals with the research grants and types that are going to come available. And there are different types of grants, and they are different in their structure, and it is important when we think about what type of research do we want to submit to what type of funding agency. Is this a foundation grant? Then it's important to also see what is the interest of the foundation, what does this foundation like to support, and that is important when we consider applying to a specific foundation. The same is true if we apply for grants that come from societies. The society has an interest to support certain aspects, and that is important to identify before we set out to submit a grant. Now, a lot of what I'm talking about is obviously my own experience. We mostly in the United States apply to the National Institute of Health. Those are very competitive grants on the one hand. On the other hand, if we have an opportunity to apply successfully for them, this provides us with a solid amount of foundation for an extended period of time. The NIH, as other government structures and institutions as well, has a differing structure of grants they provide. The grants that start and are particularly relevant for junior individuals are those that provide a research independency. Those are heavily mentored grants, and they need to be applied in a construct of a mentee and a mentor with a very clear outlined structure of this mentorship. There is what I would call classical grant type in the United States. That is a grant that comes from the R series that supports an independent research project that can be either a research project that already comes with a significant amount of preliminary data, or a more innovative, higher risk grant that does not need this amount of preliminary data. There are exploratory grants, grants for support of conferences and meetings. I think that is important to have. Research cooperative grants, grants that try to link academia with the industry, small business technology transfer grants, bigger program project grants, and educational grants, where the Science Foundation funds the education of junior individuals. Identifying the right opportunity is critical on the mission of submitting a successful grant. There are notices usually that come out. They're asking for special interests, identifying areas of increased priority, and that is a great opportunity to identify those. And then when one has a topic that fits into this, it will increase the opportunity to get funding. There are additional requests for application that the Science Foundation has identified a particular project of particular interest, and again, that increases slightly the opportunity to receive a grant, to be successful in the grant application. And with all of that, during the entire process, it is strongly recommended to work closely with the program officer, with the foundation, to make sure that one meets the expectations and the goal. And one also has an opportunity to be part of those who identify research goals of interest. And that also is an aspect that one needs to strongly consider to shape the interest of research, which then again will come to fruition when one is writing a grant for a research proposal. Now, getting prepared for a research grant is important. It is important to have the right timeline. It is important to be very specific throughout the different components of a grant. It starts with the idea, the hypothesis, the aspect of collecting preliminary data, the submission and the hopeful success of the submission, and the conduct of the research. We already talked about knowing your audience is critical. It is critical to understand the expectations. And that is what I talked about when I talked about it is important. What am I applying for? What kind of grant am I applying for? I need to understand the guidelines. I need to understand what the interests are, the objectives, and I need to tailor my grant to the specific interests of the application. And the project needs to be clearly defined. It needs to clearly articulate the problem. There is one aspect to have to do great research. Great research, I think, will only be successful if one is really able to communicate in the best possible way about the research and to write about the research. So very important it is to articulate the problem and the research in the best way possible. I want to guide you through some of the key elements of a grant application, give you some advice on what I think is important, and then to summarize what I think overall are steps and portions of a successful grant application. An abstract frequently, as with a manuscript, is one of the most relevant components of a grant, as reviewers are usually bombarded and have a lot of grants, manuscripts to read, and they focus on the abstract. So the abstract really gives the first impression. It needs to be a self-contained description of the project. It needs to be a story that is well told. It needs to provide the information on significance, what hypotheses are being asked, what the specific aims are, and what methods are employed, but not in regard to detail, just in general, what is the armamentarium of methods that are available to be able to respond to the questions that are being asked in a research project. And it needs to be clear how this research project also integrates in the institution where someone is working. So it needs to be integrated in the environment. And what I think is particularly relevant when writing an abstract is to use words that are not overly scientific, rather rather using a lay language, because we do not know where the reviewers are coming from. They may come from all different areas of expertise, and they may not have necessarily the particular expertise of the particular project and the grant that you are submitting. Specific aims, that is a critical piece, because that is a one-page summary usually that considers the following questions in regard to the specificity, the specific aims that are being asked, the hypotheses that are clearly asked, and it needs to be clear in the specific aim portion that what we plan on doing is indeed realistic and can be done. The specific aim, in addition to the abstract portion, I would consider the most relevant aspects, as frequently reviewers restrict their read of the grant to those aspects of your grant. It is very important now, going through the different aspects, how grants are being evaluated. They are evaluated by significance, they are evaluated by innovation. And the significance is a critical portion. Does the project really address an important question? Is that what we are asking of relevance to anyone? Is that if we are going to do our research successfully as we are going to state, is that going to make a difference? Is there a scientific premise to our significance? And how is it going to translate into a change of concepts, a better and improved understanding of mechanisms, and could it potentially translate to an improvement of treatments? The investigator has to have the capacity to do what they want to, what they claim on what they want to do. Does the investigator have a track record of research, of successful research that will allow and that will make the reviewer confident that the investigator will be able to do the research? For a young or a new investigator, is the support and the environment sufficient? Are there senior mentees? And if there are multiple principal investigators, what is their way of communicating? Are they collaborating? Have they shown collaboration in the past to be successful? Innovation is frequently considered the most relevant aspect of a grant application when we look into the characteristics, the criteria of a grant. Is the grant really innovative? Is the question that we ask innovative? Has that been done before? That is a critical question that reviewers want to see. They want to see that the progress being done in a grant is indeed innovative, and that the progress is not only incremental, but that it is indeed novel. That is, I think, a critical piece where many grants are getting into a challenging area and are not being funded. The approach is the more detailed outline of what one really wants to do, and that is the more detailed work of the grant that includes strategy, that includes details on the methods, that includes, and that is very important, what is being done if a certain experiment is not going to work. Is there an alternative? Is there a backup approach that we have in the grant application? It is also very important not to build and construct the grant in a way that aim and aim 2 is building on aim 1 and aim 3 is building on aim 2 and 1, because if that's the case and aim 1 is not going to work, then the entire grant is going to fall apart. So it is important that there is a link of the different projects of the specific aims, but that they are not necessarily dependent on each other, that they can also work in isolation. The environment is a critical piece that people want to see. They want to see, is the investigator prepared? Is the grant application innovative? Is it thoughtful? And that is being done with that is being shown with the specific approach. But does the environment, does the institution that an applicant is working in really provide the support, both in regard to technical aspects, equipment, supplies, but also in regard to the individuals who are necessary to execute the grant? That is an additional very important piece that needs to be shown and that needs to be clear in the grant. And finally, timing, I think, is a critical piece. What we usually try to do is we know that there is a deadline for a grant, and we start to work at a certain time to work towards that deadline. I think it is important rather to work backwards, to look at the deadline and then have a plan. When do I need to achieve certain steps in the preparation of the grant to be prepared and to have enough time to be able to have a finished product and still have enough time to have others read the product, to get the input of others, and to see that the grant is really produced and is as good as it can be. And then there's other aspects that are important. Frequently there is an administrative component to the scientific component, and it is the administration frequently wants to see the grant coming in a little bit earlier. Doing all of this is the best we can do. And this is really what we want to achieve. Funding is still very competitive, and this here is funding and pay lines from the NIH. They are frequently in an area between 10–15% of a funding support of grants that we are apply, and those who apply for grants are increasing. Nevertheless, it is important to go through this process. It is an important exercise, and funding can be achieved. So in summary, once we have the funding achieved, I think it's wonderful. We start out to celebrate, and then we need to do the research, and we need to prepare for the next grant application once it is done. With that, I want to thank you for your attention. Happy to take any questions, and good luck with your grant application.
First of all, congratulations and for this excellent overview on writing a grant. You have rightly pointed out, sometimes you need either mentor, senior mentors, so that they can get the grant. But it is very challenging for junior level faculty or those who are writing first time grant. So they do not have that much of the idea of writing, and then they do not have some good mentors. Despite having the good proposal, many times it is rejected. So that is that I have been in the evaluation committee for the funding from the ICMR and DHR of those who used to fund in India. Many times it is very challenging. You will see this is a very good project written by some of the junior faculty members, but questions raised by expert are the doability. Probably he would not be able to do that project, and based on that, that is rejected sometimes. So that is something we should take into the consideration, that we must have some senior mentors in your investigators team. So that is the one comment. Other writing, sometimes it becomes difficult when you have, suppose a specific performance is there for writing the grant from ICMR, DHR or DST in India. So there limits the words. You have to write in 200 words only about your proposals, 500 words only about your main bodies. So that becomes again the challenging. So your opinion about that. Sometimes it is difficult to write within that word limit.
So first, in regard to your comment on the challenges of writing grants and the competitive component of getting grants. I was surprised that I was invited to give you this talk. I would not consider myself as being someone who writes a grant and gets support for every grant application I submit. By far not. I feel that I have improved over time. I feel that my grant writing has improved and has gotten better, but there are still applications that I submit and think this has been the world's best grant and it's not being funded. That's what we need to deal with. I think that's part of it. Some reviewers have different opinions, and writing a grant not being funded only, I think, means to resubmit a grant. That is one aspect. In regard to your question, the word count and limitations, that's an interesting aspect. If one gets used, the usual NIH applications, they are 10 pages, and we get used to this amount. I recently had to submit an application that was only 6 pages. So now I thought, oh my God, how can I condense all of this in this smaller amount of available space there is? It can be done. It's a matter of training, and we can reduce information, and that's part of the exercise of learning how to write grants. It can be done.
Great talk, Dr. Chulius. Deirdre Sawinski from the United States. You spoke about having a track record, which clearly is important, and I know you're very involved with TTS. Could you speak a bit about opportunities for foundation funding through groups like TTS to help young investigators build a track record so they can apply for larger grants and the role potentially for industry funding?
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think our professional societies play an important role here, and TTS does this. TTS has a grants program. TTS has focused and has increased the availability of grants. It is still very small in the overall and big picture, and there are limitations of societies in regard to their finances. What we do as TTS, we try to focus particularly on a global component, but obviously also on the aspect of the quality of the research. I think there are early foundation grants that are important, but also publication that show that one is qualified to get grants, presentations at scientific meetings. It is the overall picture that gets a young investigator also in a position to be able to apply. And then there are awards where, again, societies play a role, and TTS has those awards where it particularly supports junior investigators, mentee-mentors award that give an opportunity to get recognition to young investigators.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thanks to our first speaker, and I would like to request Dr. Narayan Prasad and Dr. Vivek Kutte to please present a small memento to our first speaker, Dr. Stephen.
Thank you.